In the interest of making sure that we have an opportunity for you to engage with our esteemed panel, the Presidential Precinct did a marvelous job of outlining all of the bios and information of these wonderful people. So I won't get into the bios, but I want to make sure that I introduce each one of you real quickly. So as part of my panel, part of this panel, on really sort of diving deeper in sort of the practical insights on SDG alignment and what kinds of partnerships, cross-sector partnerships are working, what are the lessons learned, all of those kinds of things. That's what we're going to be talking about in this short time together. So with us is Dessie Nash, who is the Managing Director and Market Investment Executive for Bank of America Private Bank. Dessie, there we go. Ellen Bassett, who is the Professor and Chair of Urban and Environmental Planning here at UVA's School of Architecture. There we go, Ellen. Erin Kennedy is the Senior Director of External Engagement for ChildFund International. And then rounding out our panel is Kelli Palmer, the Head of Global Diversity and Inclusion and Corporate Citizenship for CFA Institute, which is based right here in Charlottesville. So can we just welcome our panel real quickly, guys? So we had a really terrific conversation this morning. I just want to set the context, and we're going to get into some of the initiatives, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to sort of give a little bit of a personal sort of background and a highlight on some initiatives that they're working on. And then we'll drill down on some of those initiatives and talk a little bit about some of the things around resources, which came up in this morning's conversation, and how do you sort of sustain these kinds of relationships. So really, really important. So we do know that no sector, one sector, can solve these very complex global issues. That is a fact. That is where we are right now. But the SDGs are a framework, right? That's how they're positioned. And what we have to do, those who represent our respective sectors, is how do we align to ensure that we are dedicating the necessary resources, time and attention, and partnership management to advance towards these projects. I was really struck by Rachel's comment this morning about we're making progress, right? And that's great. That's fantastic. But we need to move faster, right? And so that's where we are right now. We have momentum, but how do we sort of build on that momentum to create more lasting results and to achieve the goals that we set for 2030? So with that, I'm going to ask Erin to start us off with a little bit of, personal, how'd you end up here and all these kinds of things, and then a little bit about your project, and then we'll just go down real quickly.
Thanks.
Okay.
First, I just want to say how honored I am. Reading your bios is really humbling and inspiring, and I am just so grateful to be with all of you today. You have an incredible experience, and I just want to say how grateful I am to be in your presence. So I am Erin. I lead our at ChildFund International. It's an organization that we reach about 10.5 million children across 22 countries globally. And our entire mission, and I say this at a dinner party and sometimes it doesn't go over well, but we're all about ending violence against children. Picking up on some of the points this morning from Rick and from Rachel, I think it's really important when we think about this big document with all the indicators and all of the targets that we all are thinking about our niche. And part of my sort of personal journey has been around how children are impacted by violence. Talking about emotional, physical, sexual exploitation, all kinds of violence. And so ChildFund's main mission is around this issue of ending violence against children. It happens here, it happens in every corner of the world. 1 billion children, 1 billion children are impacted by violence each and every year. So that's really what we're here about. And the perspective that we're able to bring is that we really think about it across all different life cycles, life stages. Little kids mostly are affected by violence at the hands of caretakers and parents. school-aged kids. This happens on the way to school, in and around school, bullying, corporal punishment, and then kind of at the older age, there's a lot of bullying and other sorts of violence. So violence really drives us, and we believe it's so important because without ensuring that children grow up safe, then all of our other development indicators are out the window. And so that's just a little bit about me. I think the other piece that is really important to put on the table and then passing it along is that we really believe in lifting children. And when I say children, I mean children and youth, but lifting the voices and the agency of children and youth. A lot of times at these high-level meetings, there's not a youth or a child in sight. And that's a real problem when we think about making sure that solutions are led and informed by children and youth, because oftentimes they tell us what they need rather than the reverse. Thank you.
Okay, great. Dessie?
Wow. Again, my name is Dessie Nash. I'm the market investment executive for the Virginia market for the private bank of Bank of America, and we lend money. But more importantly, around these SDGs, we do a lot of work in all 17 of them. I specifically work in 2 of them, and the big focus is around economic mobility because, that's what we do. And we have this campaign right now, and it's called the Power To. And this Power To campaign is implying that we need to give people the power to do things that they are passionate about. So every meeting where our CEO, Brian Moynihan, attends, he asks people, what do you want the power to do? And it's amazing of all the various responses. So specifically around economic mobility, and what I'm working on is our Pathways program. And this program is to have jobs for 10,000 low to moderate income individuals in the markets where we have the largest presence. And about a third of our financial centers are located in these low to moderate income. And we want to go back to those communities, train them, provide education, and then have them come and work in our financial centers. And what this does is it empowers that community to be bigger and stronger. The other thing I work on, and I sit on the board for our Neighborhood Builders, and this is a nonprofit leadership development program. And we've expanded this to include workforce development within the education of the leaders, the communities that they sit, and help people meet those basic needs. So with the ChildFund, we would help the nonprofit leaders of these nonprofit organizations be empowered to do things to change their communities. And what I love about this Neighborhood Builders program is we've gone from 66 grants to 98 grants, and we are committed to give over $10 million to these programs.
Great. Thanks, Dessie. Ellen?
Sure, so I'm Ellen Bassett, and I am a faculty member here at UVA. So I guess my role in this panel is to represent higher ed, which is a bit daunting. But if you think about higher ed, you think about UVA, what do? We do research and we teach. And so those are really fundamentally the sectors that we work in. And I would say that as I look across the goals, I can think of colleagues across the university and across universities that work in all of these areas. So we're very fundamentally involved in thinking about how to achieve the SDGs, if not sort of working directly on them. In terms of my own research, I was starting to enumerate. I work in sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm an Africanist. I work in East Africa, in particular Kenya and Uganda. And I'm an urban planner. So my work really focuses on the urban transition of the globe, you know, that more people now live in cities than live in rural areas across the world. And I've been very focused in my research on thinking about substandard living conditions, slums. The UN has embraced that term. We didn't embrace it when I was in graduate school. We called them informal settlements. But really working on understanding the drivers of substandard living conditions, what it means to be a slum dweller, and then to identify policy interventions that can actually improve life. So I work a lot in Nairobi. Nairobi has some of the worst slums in sub-Saharan Africa relative to access to infrastructure, health outcomes, affordable housing, housing quality, things like that. So that's one area in which I've been working very actively. I also work very actively in the area of governance, and this is probably, if you're going to work in sustainable development, trying to change governmental institutions and institutional frameworks may be one of the slow games. It takes a while, but I've been very interested in the rise of democracy in the sub-Saharan Africa, and actually with the Precinct, I'm very active in the Young African Leaders Initiative, the Mandela Washington Fellows Program, in which we bring folks like you and really talk about how do we bolster democracy in the continent. And so my own research is really focused on the new Kenyan Constitution from 2010, which has devolved governance down to a lower level entity called the county. And what does this mean to having greater participatory democracy relative to, in fact, achieving things like greater gender equality, better housing conditions, access to clean water, and those kind of things. So I'll talk a bit later about some of the specific things that we're doing at UVA that are research associated with this, but I like to think that our real impact is that we produce a cohort of people who then are out working in the world and really making change.
Fantastic.
Hey, Kelli?
All right. In addition to working on inclusion and diversity and corporate citizenship, I have environmental sustainability as a part of my purview at CFA Institute. We are a professional association for the investment management profession and industry, and we're really all about ethics and education and professional excellence. And the last 6 words of our mission are for the ultimate benefit of society, which is rather lofty. And so that's where I spend my time. In early 2019, CFA Institute decided to sign on to the UN Global Compact and commit to the principles. And it's a large call to look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 10 principles. So we decided to focus in on the 4 SDGs that I think most align with our work. Quality education, decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities, and climate action. And in doing so, we work with our over 150,000 members in over 165 countries to move the needle. And we do that all while being headquartered right here in Charlottesville. Some of our efforts, I think, worth speaking to are our Investment Foundations curriculum, which is an entry level curriculum for the profession. It's free and available to anyone, anywhere, and it serves as a pathway to fluency about the industry and creating employment and economic opportunities for others. In addition to that, we have a partnership in India to advance opportunity for women on that in that space, in that country. And this program is really meeting a variety of needs that we assessed, but has had great success in its first year and a half or so of operation. Closer to where we are right now, we partner to advance investor education with nonprofits as a sector, but also with folks who are retirement ready or retired and thinking about how they live out the rest of their days. We're living longer, and to avoid poverty, we need to have some understanding about how to make our resources work for us. And finally, in that environmental sustainability space that I was so sure to include at the top of my remarks, we've partnered with the Habitat for Humanity of Greater Charlottesville to do some work around reducing carbon impact of those homes that are built. But that also has the parallel benefit of providing some environmental justice. And as we know, as the climate begins to warm, the people who will be most affected by that first are people of lower socioeconomic status, and predominantly people who are from historically underrepresented populations. And so our work with Habitat, while small in that it's just a few houses in this geography, is actually creating a global model for ways that we can do the good work from a fairly corporate perspective in partnership with a not-for-profit. So I will pause there and just say that it is a deep honor to be with all of you today and to be a part of a conversation with such an impressive group of people around how we can amplify our impact by partnering, because no one of us, either individual or organization, as Mark said, will do this on our own. It is the collective effort that will make the impact that keeps us here.
Thanks, Kelli. So I'm going to start, Kelli, with you because you sort of set me up very nicely for my next question. And we talked about this during the opening keynote session. Of course, we have 17 SDGs, right? And here in this particular format, we've narrowed it down to 5 SDGs in terms of our focus. You mentioned at CFA that you've identified 4. I'm just curious, and the other panelists, feel free to jump in, but what is the importance in the process by which your organizations begin to sort of figure out what it makes sense in terms of alignment, and how does that matter, and why is that important to your organizations? I just want to get a curious sort of view into that world based on what the organizations you represent. So.
Well, I think the comment has already been made about the importance of doing what you do best,
Right.
or starting where your mission is. Right. And so that's where we started. If you look at quality education, we are first and foremost a credentialer.
Right.
And so we thought that's the first thing that we do. That's core to where we are already experts and where we are already doing our work. And then if you think about where we are a credentialer and how we are providing a credential, it is in a space that thinks about decent work and economic growth. So there you have this natural progression through the two. As you look at the things that are not industry specific, but that we've chosen to take on as priorities as an organization, you then get into the space of reduced inequalities. Women in investment management are remarkably underrepresented across the globe, and we've taken that on. We've also had some really significant discussions and are starting to lead work around diversity more broadly. And so that led naturally into reduced inequalities. And then the final item is climate action. And sometimes individuals just have a little muscle.
Right, right.
Climate action was one of those spaces. We took the leap in redoing a building and going for LEED, which got our organization some fluency around greenhouse gas emissions and understanding what that was all about. But then it was really the power of the individuals within the organization who brought the need to maintain the context within which all this work happens. And so that's how we got to
Got
R4.
it. So it's got to be authentic. I mean,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
Anyone else wanted to weigh in and provide their own experience?
Well, for Bank of America, because we are so large, we are an international company, we had to pick which ones we were going to hit in various areas in order to touch all 17. So here in the US, it's around energy, affordable housing, water and sanitation, and climate resiliency. And what's interesting is there are 8 lines of business across the bank, and each line has this SDG initiative to implement at a line of business level, at a divisional level, at a market level, and also at an individual level. So all 235,000 individuals that work for Bank of America are touching one of these SDGs, which just again goes back to my earlier comment about the power in empowering individuals.
Erin?
Just to say, I mean, I think one of the things that came up earlier, and to make a point about it, is that a lot of the evidence gaps are really big on the SDGs. And you know, Rachel mentioned the targets, and there's even more indicators. And so what, as an organization, we've tried to do is to say, okay, we can't prioritize everyone, but we're going to look at those indicators, and we're going to integrate them into our own monitoring and evaluation system, and we're going to encourage our partners to do the same. So at least we're starting from the same place.
Right.
In the context of the US government, we're doing the same thing, saying, okay, look, align with this. It doesn't have to be all 230, but I think the data and the measurement is another way to kind of building on these points to align that we're all driving in the same direction.
Gotcha. Erin, you obviously you represent the independent sector as an NGO in this conversation. I'm just curious, how do you talked about partnerships. How do you move forward to ensure that your partners and your organization are advancing towards these common goals and have an understanding of the targets that you're setting out to achieve in collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to answer that question, I want to go really specific.
Okay, sure, absolutely.
And drawing into something we're doing in the Philippines.
Okay.
And I know we have a Filipino student here somewhere, so keep me honest. Hello. Hi. But what we are doing related to the violence against children is that online sexual exploitation, a very uncomfortable topic that touches multiple different industries, is really a hotbed in the Philippines. And so what we are doing is 3 things. One, we're working directly with communities and children because, probably not surprising, but poverty is a big driver of this. Oftentimes parents even kind of push their kids into this because they don't know sort of what the consequences are. So we're working directly with children and families. We're working with the government to get a commitment around this. There's gaps in policy and there's gaps around data. And then we're working with the private sector. So with journalists, media is a huge influencer in the Philippines and many other places, including our own country. And we're working with the hotel industry. We're doing something with the hotel industry, especially around some of the islands, Cebu in particularly, that has a really high it's a place where people come to exploit children and predators come. And so we're working with hotels to sign these different pacts saying they will be a free of child exploitation. And so just to kind of give you an example of how we're trying to touch multiple sectors, and this is a huge problem in the US with tech companies. Right. Last year, they reported for the first time there were 45 million incidents of individual either pornography or different pictures. And so the tech industry has a role to play in this too. We haven't yet cracked that nut, so anyone who has a direct line to Mark Zuckerberg, let me know. But this is a really important multi-sectoral problem that requires this multi-sectoral answer.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we were, Ellen, you were talking about your role as an urban planner, which I thought was very fascinating. Obviously, you work with local governments.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about those kinds of collaborations and how those work? Because that's where a lot of the complexity, sometimes bureaucracy exists, and how do you sort of navigate those landscapes in order to get the buy-in and the commitments you need by local governments to sort of advance the work that you're doing there on the ground?
Well, let me talk what UVA is doing locally here, which I think is a really good example of working with local government, local communities. We've just announced as part of our strategic plan that we're going to set up a new Center for the Redress of Inequities. And as you may know, Charlottesville has had in the past a lot of issues and tensions relative to August 11th and 12th when we had the Unite the Right rally and sort of the fractures that we've seen within our own community. And the university has had a history of being a little bit buffered from the community and not maybe as engaged as they should be. And so we have really been, and this is Jim Ryan's leadership in particular, coming to grips with sort of our role in social inequities in our local community. We've been investing heavily in setting up a community-based committee that represents not only local government, but the churches, right, the faith-based organizations. It represents, different neighborhoods, different sectors around affordable housing. And so we're really hoping to build, especially trust, to address sort of the deep seated issues that we have in our community. And they may manifest as discussions over race and poverty, but it's also about access to opportunity, it's access to good affordable housing. And so I think we are trying to be nimble and listen a lot and be very respectful to our local community and admit that we have had tensions. And so I think, but if you think of a city as a complex entity and a university as a complex entity, and then we have these students that move through, I think we just have to make a real long-term commitment to be a good neighbor, a good partner, and that is what we have done. And trying to keep a little bit out of the political realm and focus on eye on the prize, what we want, which is to address inequities.
Yeah, and we talked about stakeholder management this morning as being important, and clearly identifying who those stakeholders are and making sure you build that trust.
Exactly.
Because there is, unfortunately, a viewpoint around negativity on institutions as a whole, just globally, and we need to understand, and universities as well. So I think that's important. I have a couple more questions of the panel, and then I'm going to throw it out to you guys, so get your questions ready. So, so one of the things, Dessie, that came up this morning was resources, right? And I was doing a little research for this conversation, and I found this very interesting data point. And it was from the United Nations that said it will take $5 to $7 trillion annually to meet all 17 SDG goals. 5 to 7 trillion. A lot of resources. So where does that capital come from, right? Where is the money going to come from for that? We talked about governments don't have the resources. Corporations, have many different stakeholders that they have to manage, including profitability and shareholder return. But there's this very interesting group called individual investors. and private investors. So in your world, Dessie, like, obviously you're seeing more people very interested in sustainability development, investment, and all these kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about from where you sit, how that may play out as it relates to these goals?
Sure. So it occurs two ways. We recognize that governments, nonprofits can't do this alone. So it takes the private sector. So capital deployment is also important. So what Bank of America has created is what's called this stimulus pool. And the point of this pool is to encourage private capital to help finance these SDG goals, particularly in the development of emerging and developing markets and economies. And again, it focuses on a particular SDG. And the big thing here is because if we're doing it, other people in the private sector will follow. In addition to, we have a whole ESG, SDG, actual investment group that's part of the Chief Investment Office to help our clients with those individual SDG goals that they want to accomplish. Because obviously, you know, at the private bank, we have very wealthy clients, and they've made their money. And part of our role is to help them deploy it in areas that they are passionate about. And what's interesting is how all this came about was we have this, we'll call courageous conversations. And these courageous conversations hit various points within the bank. And it started off internally, and now I'm experimenting with having it go outward, separate conversation. But the point of it is there were individual associates, individual clients from client focus groups that said, hey, Bank of America, you need to do more. And certainly we could put up the money, but more importantly was backing it up. So we help take companies issuing we're the #1 underwriter of green bonds, for example. Our catalytic finance initiative has about $11 billion in it, and it's just to help impact clean energy projects. So we want to talk it, but we also want to walk it.
So my last question, I want to throw it to Kelli, because it builds on this investment mindset. And you guys, obviously, you're a member of this community, but you represent a global body, right?
Yes.
You're a global
Yes.
organization, yes. So your membership is all over the world, right? But you've made an investment here in this community. You were talking about your investment in terms of dollars, right? Like measurable economic impact in the community. You know, that's powerful, right? When you say these are the things that we're doing to quantify what we're doing here in Charlottesville. Why is that important to you, and how does that align with your mission as an organization to be able to frame it that we're making these kinds of economic investments here in Charlottesville?
You know, I think the short answer is money talks. Right. And so quantifying one's contribution allows us to be heard. Right. And we are not long time in this set of activities. Right. I posit that we're newer to it than anyone up here. Being a professional association, we are stewards of our members' money and our test takers' money, and we did not realize that we could be community-minded beyond our mission until about 5 years ago. And so when we entered this space, we decided to commission an economic impact study to quantify what we had done and to repeatedly have that kind of study so that we could go to folks and say, see, we're serious, we're already doing something, and we want to partner with you to amplify our impact. And we found that being able to quantify our worth and impact in the environment has opened a lot of doors. Okay. And it's a great way to get in spaces that it may take others without those numbers a much longer time to get into. So the
community benefits, your business benefits.
Absolutely. There's a double benefit of both brand and ultimate environmental, societal impact.
That's good. All right. Who wants to take the first question? Oh, wow. So many. There we go. Chair Way?
Thank you very much. My name is Chewe from Zambia. This is for everyone, but maybe specifically for, is it Erin?
Yes.
Back in Zambia, I work for an organization called Psych Health Zambia, and we provide psychological services to survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. And we've had constant conversations with ChildFund Zambia as well, and trying to see how we can work with the children. Now, the question I want to ask is, I like that she said money talks, because it's in line with that. I read that Melinda Gates, bless her soul, pledged $1 billion over the next 10 years to fight gender equality, but in the US.
Yeah.
How do we, speaking as an African, how do we tap into such opportunities? But secondly, and most importantly, I work for a small organization. How do we build credibility that, because most times when we write proposals and whatnot, we get responses that work with your government, Ministry of Health. And we are saying, Rick had mentioned, the biggest problem obviously is leadership. And so it's going back to, sorry, I'm going to combine lots of things here, but yeah, it goes back to we're not going to get that funding because of the leadership challenges. So how do we make sure that as small organizations in our communities get access to such opportunities?
Yeah, so just, first of all, I would love to get your card, and I can connect you with some of our folks in the Zambia office. And then I think I'd like to start from going small to big. Donor trends increasingly of the US government and others want to fund local organizations. This sector has been talking about building capacity and building and working themselves out of business for as long as probably I've been alive, right? And I think that particularly with USAID, which is probably the donor that I know the most, they are making a really concerted effort. And so I would say a couple things. One, I think continue to prepare yourself to kind of be that partner. We at ChildFund are always looking for local partners to be our organization that we work with, that we would put forward with a Gates Foundation or a USAID. So I would say, I think increasingly the trends globally are changing, and I think that's a really good thing. The other thing, I know it's hard, but I would say the partnership with government, and we talked a little bit about what a slow haul that can be, but government needs capacity building. They need to understand the complexities of these issues, and increasingly funds are going directly to governments, right? So I just think that's another way to kind of think about that, become that technical partner of choice in health with the Ministry of Health in Zambia, and continue to do what you're doing, which is build your own capacity, meet with others, and partner. And then concretely, I'd love to connect with you and learn more about the work and how we might be able to partner in Zambia.
Thanks, Erin.
Others.
Great. Chris?
Thank you very much for the session. It's been very insightful. I run a nonprofit in Nigeria, and one of the things that we focus on is improving the health and well-being of the people in Nigeria. And we understand that public-private partnership is very important, especially with the government. And you get to design and implement programs around public health issues, and you get funding, yes, you run it for max 5 years. But then you need to transition these solutions to the government to be able to sustain them. So we have the problem of sustainability, because one of the reasons is the fact that there's always this volatile government. This government comes in and goes in a short period of time, another comes in. And we have that problem. Also the problem of policy and advocacy. Yes, you get to advocate for things, but then they're not implemented when it comes to establishing policies that would last for a long time and ensure that these solutions are there. Now, these are the challenges that we face. Fundings come, but the solutions are not sustained over a long period of time. So what would be your advice, to lots of us who have been implementing programs like this, and the solutions are there? We know that these things will improve the health system and the health sector of our countries, but they're not being sustained because of governmental issues and all of that.
I'm going to put Ellen on the spot.
Yeah, I was going to say. I saw that
So
coming.
Ellen, because you guys, you have a partnership in South Africa, right? And would there be opportunities to share some of your experiences? Because that's an investment that the university has made.
Sure. So let me just say that the challenges you face relative to sustainable funding and policy changes are actually ubiquitous. They're in the United States as well. We have, change administration, policy environment can change. But I do think he's making a reference to a really fantastic public health project that UVA has been involved with called the Pure Madi Project. It's in South Africa. And it is essentially a project that is an incredible partnership between our Center for Public Health, our School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and then a variety of folks around the university that has worked on developing a filter that goes into a water bucket that helps filtrate out bacteria, but then also through a silver nitrate purifies water. And it's an amazing project in that it is a synergy of great research with community outreach, good partnership with the University of Venda, but they've also kind of figured out the financial sustainability side of it. And what they've done, and I don't want to always fall back in social entrepreneurship, but they have actually made it a way that they'll sell their filters, they'll get the funding stream that comes in, and they've been able to sort of keep the women that are making the filters employed and keep sort of building this project. But I think it's, the answer there is it's multiple-pronged solutions. So it's not just social entrepreneurship, but they're writing grants, they're partnering internationally, they're doing whatever they can to sort of keep things aligned. The government in that case hasn't gotten in the way. It hasn't necessarily been an aid. The one thing that I think from the African subcontinent or sub-Saharan Africa, what's really something we haven't fostered, to be honest, is a philanthropy in the way that we do it pretty well in the United States. And so I know when I was working in Kenya, Ford Foundation was very actively trying to build philanthropic efforts in Kenya because there's a lot of very affluent people who could be putting their money into certain sectors. And so I think to me that's an area where I'd really love for us to work on thinking about philanthropy outside of your tribe or your ethnic grouping, outside of your family, as something that can really help us sustain. So it's not a perfect answer for you, but I think, and you probably could have answered this yourself, but look everywhere, make great partnerships, and I think you really, again, talk about meeting people, we really need to have you meet our people at the Center for Global Health. They're terrific. They've got a great project and great ideas.
Right. There were some questions over here and then here. Okay, we'll go here and then, actually we'll go here and then come back here. Okay.
Thank you guys for sharing today. This question might be more directed towards Ellen, but anybody's obviously welcome to answer. When we're looking at like higher ed and universities, there's so much that can be done for educating about the SDGs, but we're actually looking at collaborating to be active towards the SDGs. Is it more important for these points of collaboration to be led by the administration, or do you think that there's more benefit and opportunity for these points of collaboration to be led by students, student organizations, or other co-curricular departments?
Okay, interesting. So there's a phrase about faculty that leading faculty is like herding cats, right? So I don't think the administration is it at all. In fact, when I look around what's happened at UVA that's very relevant to the SDGs, we have a Center for Environmental Resilience, an ERI, Environmental Resilience Institute. We have a global sustainability program. We have now a new emphasis, an African studies program that all came from the student body, right? It came from the students being activists and wanting certain things. And the faculty are great allies, but indeed, I mean, when Greta was in the country, right, I was so inspired to see somebody that articulate, that emotional, that moving us forward. We respond to what the students want. And so I think relative to this framework, yeah, students can really motivate change within a university, and then of course, all the opportunities you get outside to do internships, to get out and be active. I think there's and we're pretty well resourced here, so we can really move things along. But I think it's, incumbent upon students to really take a lead and inspire us.
Can I add on
Anyone?
to that?
Yeah, please.
So one of the things that we focus also on at Bank of America is this thought of social entrepreneurship, and I think Ellen touched on that a little bit. And it is financing companies that want to make a social impact in their local communities. We've financed up to $450 billion for companies around low carbon emissions, and holding people accountable to that. And internally, what we do is holding our vendors to these SDGs, right? Because if the people that you hire have to meet the standard, it's this trickle down effect. So it's also having the foresight, but that foresight can come from anywhere.
That's great, thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Meenakshi, and I am really grateful to be here, and the discussion was really insightful. And if you don't mind, I want to take this discussion to a little bit on a personal level, and it's totally fine if you do not want to answer, because you guys, like, you inspire me so deeply, like women sitting on the top of the world and like leading and guiding, not only like one gender, but all of us. So my question is towards the he for she component. Like, how do you strike a balance between your professional and personal life? How do you make sure that you do not like put on a spot about you are not good enough or you are selfish? So, yeah. Thank you very much. So, any thoughts or
Any
any
of you
suggestions?
decide to jump in and take that on?
I will. As an inclusion and diversity person, I often find myself answering that question. And what I will say is that my professional work is deeply personal, and that there is no line between them. And that may not be the answer that I should be giving all the time. You know, we like to think about being able to balance and have separate spaces. That's in fact not how I live. Expanding diversity in investment management means creating a world in which people who look like me and people who don't look normative or who don't live normative have opportunity and equality. And that's so personal. And it's what lets me do the work at the weird hours on the strange days. And that's the same thing about environmental sustainability. I have 4 children. Leaving a world to my 4 children that is functional and inhabitable is more compelling than any paycheck I will ever receive. Yet that paycheck pays for me to help them make those choices for themselves and to be educated. So for me, it all loops back together, and it's not neat, and it's not tidy, and sometimes it's hard. But that inspiration that you feel in the moments where you get it is that same inspiration I have when I think about who we get to impact for every minute in. I can't imagine not doing this work. I can't imagine working on something where I don't get to think about the future of society as we know it in every choice I make and everything I do.
And just to jump in, I would say such a great question. I think, you know, I have 2 little kids, and I feel like part of what I think about is the inequality of my children who are upset about their Halloween costume this morning, and then reading this report of like a 10-year-old in Philippines who's being forced into online sex, right? When you think about the inequality in our world, and at the same time, I feel like I don't do it well all the time. Sometimes I'm really good and I'm hitting it out of the charts on work, and sometimes I am a great mother. But doing it at the same time is really hard, and just giving yourself some grace and some confidence that it's okay to be both of these things and to not do it perfectly. And then I just have to take one more thing, because I thought about you in Nigeria. My other very specific advice to you, speaking about the money, is involve the Minister of Finance. Oftentimes when we go to countries, we talk to the women of social affairs or the minister of education, and that's not where the money is. These policies are not well resourced, and they're not, so that would be kind of very specific advice, is that you talk to the people that have the money in country and anywhere. I took a little
Erin,
bit.
I love it. Call an audible, you gotta do it. Anyone else want to respond to that question? I think it was really powerful.
It is a very good question.
Yeah.
And one of the things I had to do, I had to get over it's not right, right? I had to get over it. It's not right that as a woman of color, people, you know, just immediately go and have these stereotypes about me. I work in an industry where there are literally 5 of us at my level of a company that's 235,000 people, 5. So now, are we trying to make progress? Of course. But I had to get over that's not right, and be passionate about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I have my professional job. I love what I do, getting in front of people and sharing. But what is more impactful for me and why I continue to go to the office day in and day out is the sheer ability that this job has given me to pay it forward and pull through. So now I can go to Kelli's organization and say, I need a young lady of whatever, to come and work for me. And I have that power to hire her, groom her, nurture her, and I hope that she becomes my boss or my children's boss. And that's what I do in recognizing it. It's not right, so what?
Ellen, anything you would like
No,
to add?
I can't follow those.
Yeah, okay. So, role of a moderator often is to know when to end the session. And this is a moment to end the session. So I just want to thank Dessie, Erin, Ellen, and Kelli for your insight and your passionate remarks. Thank you for a great session. I appreciate it.
Thank you.